Thank you very much indeed. I sometimes start this talk with brothers and sisters, I'm here to talk about God. Growing Old Disgracefully. And it's always amusing to see the sort of the fall in the expression of those that thought they were coming for something a little more light-hearted than that. What I'm going to do is I shall talk for a bit, I'll tell some stories, and then we'll open it up to questions. So any questions that you've got, be ready with them, and that way we can all have a bit of fun with this. Now, the speaker's over there. If I move myself just a little bit like there, so that's better. Is it still working? Yes, I think it is.
Just have to off the microphone.
And you want me to talk a bit like that? Right, okay, I'm happy to do that. So I was listening to the Chancellor talking about the budget this afternoon, and thinking, yes, he wants us all back at work, doesn't he? Will I respond to the opportunity to have free nursery places? Well, possibly a bit late for me, but it's interesting to see how the role of older people is now seen as so much more important. I mean, it's a very long time since I became a pensioner, but I'm in extremely good company, because Paul McCartney's still singing and he's older than I am. And Clint Eastwood is still making movies, and he's older than both of us. And this week on Sunday night, Monday morning, the top Oscars went to Michelle Yeoh, who is 60, and Jamie Lee Curtis, who's 64. So it's not just older people, it's older women. Couldn't be better. I have just occasionally one is made aware of how big a change that is in society. I have a Ukrainian family staying with me. They've been with me now for almost a year. And Hannah has only just told me what little Misha said when I picked them up at the airport at 4 o'clock in the morning. Because he was 8 at the time. What he couldn't get over and couldn't understand, and he asked his mother, is, what is this old grandmother doing driving a Tesla? And his older brother explained to me that ladies our age, my age, don't drive cars in Ukraine. And of course, if you think about it, that used to be true in this country. My mother, born in 1912, never drove. And one reason was that driving was something that men did. So culturally, that's how that worked out. But also, I suspect, and this is probably true in Ukraine as well, that when the man dies, the woman doesn't have that much money left. She's not going to get a decent pension, and therefore she can't afford to drive. So what is this babushka doing driving this Tesla? And the answer is, it's a modern country, it's a different world, and it's changed a lot here. Now, attitudes to what is old have shifted a lot over time. Do you remember David Beckham saying that he really felt it was time that he kind of moved on, and he didn't want to be still playing football when he was 34? And I remember John Lennon saying that he didn't want to be a Beatle still when he was 30. And sadly, he didn't get that much further, did he? What is age is seen as relative. Many years ago, when I was a Member of Parliament in South Derbyshire, we were about to welcome Toyota. And I thought it might be a good idea for us to go to another part of the country. And by us, I meant me and the council chairman and a couple of other people, and just find out what it was like when a Japanese company arrived right on your doorstep and started doing things their way. And so we arranged a visit up to Tyne and Wear, and amongst the companies we went to see was Nissan, who were extremely helpful, very nice. And I talked through some of the issues with them, employment practices and so on. And I said, did you have any problems when you arrived that you weren't expecting? And if so, what did you do with them? And they said, talked to one. And I said, well, there was one problem with the age of the workforce. What the age of the workforce? Yes, they said, you see, we recruited lots of people and we trained them up, and they work in teams on the car lines. And we noticed that the productivity of some of the teams would drop quite dramatically for maybe 6 or 8 months, and then it might improve. And we discovered that the reason was that there'd be somebody on the team whose wife, and they were all blokes in those days, whose wife had just had a baby. So it was as if the entire team had had a baby and they were all having sleepless nights. So I said, well, what did you do about this? And they said, oh, we started recruiting older workers. And they put out adverts looking for people aged over 25. That's an absolute true story. Lady Astor was the first woman to take her seat in Parliament, and she was one of my subjects, one of my special subjects. I've won Celebrity Mastermind twice, and both times with famous women. The first time with Marie Curie, and the second time with Lady Astor, because we happened to be making it on the anniversary of women getting the vote in November 1918. And Lady Astor got younger and younger as the years went by. And at one stage she said, well, you know, let me get the quote exactly right, because I don't think we're as coy about this these days. She said, I refuse to admit that I'm more than 52, even if that makes my sons illegitimate. I was proposed into Parliament by Dame Jill Knight, who was then the MP for Edgbaston. And Jill did exactly the same, and she ended up in the House of Lords. And every who's who, I'd have a look and see how young Jill was. And she got to the stage when she was in the ATS when she was 10. Now, I don't take that view. People sometimes still are a bit coy, but I'm fairly open about what year I was born in, which is 1946, so you can all work it out for yourself. Another example was the Member of Parliament for Billericay, who was a lovely woman called Teresa Gorman. And she was elected in 1987 when I was actually a health minister. And I was given, just to keep me quiet as much as anything, I was given a whole day's debate in the House of Commons that I could have on a Friday for whatever subject I wanted to do. And so I chose women's health, which has never been debated ever before in the House of Commons. And we were going along quite well. And then Teresa stood up when it was her turn. She was newly elected MP, very attractive woman, very bright and bouncy. And she said, I'm here to talk about HRT, hormone replacement therapy. And the guy on the front row, who was the whip, who was sitting next to me, sort of cringed and looked round. Because I'd driven them all crazy by talking about breast cancer and cervical cancer and all that kind of thing. And then here's this new MP, and she's talking about HRT. And she said, I think it should be available on the NHS. She said, I think it's absolutely brilliant. When I was selected, she said, when I was selected to fight this seat, I told them all that I was 48. And I'm not, I'm 58. And it's HRT that does it. And the whips are writing with all this stuff. And bless her, she didn't bat an eyelid. She was right, absolutely right. And she was, as she said, an embodiment of what happens when you take the tablets and they are the right tablets. She eventually passed away aged, how old is it? 84, and she looked about 60. So, you know, there are pioneers like that have made life very different for us. Age in politics can be a little difficult, but I always thought Ronald Reagan dealt with it extremely well, because Reagan was actually fighting his election first time when he was 73. And his opponent was Walter Mondale, who was 56. And Reagan was asked during one of the debates whether he wasn't actually too old to be standing as president. And Reagan was brilliant in a very understated way. And what he said was this, too old? He said, no, I will not make age an issue in this campaign. I am not going to exploit for political purposes my opponent's youth and total inexperience. And he won it. He won it because he took the issue and he took the sting out of it. And the outcome of that was nobody could be rude about him anymore. Sometimes you get difficult relationships between the different generations. remember many years ago, I was invited to speak to a ladies' lunch group in Epsom. I used to live down in Surrey for quite a long time. And one of them was asked, there was a perennial question in that sort of area about how awful young people are and how they're not interested in anything except, we would say now, being on their phones. It was something slightly different then. And they weren't in the least interested in politics. They are now, but they weren't then. And what could we do about it? So I said, well, look, how many people here have got grandchildren? All the hands went up. I said, well, it might be an idea to find out what they're interested in. I mean, they actually are interested in things. So I would suggest you take them to McDonald's or somewhere, and instead of you telling them what you think, ask them what they think about some of the issues of the day. And there was a kind of stunned silence. And I said to one lady, what's the problem? And she said, I can't stand McDonald's. I said, well, then somewhere else, somewhere else, but it's got to be somewhere they like, not your kind of place, but you can find somewhere else. And the lady next to her said, I'm sorry, I still couldn't do that. I said, why not? She said, I can't stand my grandchildren. Yeah, that was absolutely true. That's how that worked. That's absolutely how it worked. I liked a Telegraph matte cartoon of a pensioners' protest march. On the placards it said, what do we want? Where are we going? Why are we here? Right, now how many people are we talking about? And the answer is a lot, a lot. Populations are aging all over the world. I think actually public policy is beginning to latch on to this. The only places where it isn't happening is in war zones and in Russia. Actually, in Russia the population is getting younger because people die quite young still. And the implications of it, I would say, are as important as global warming. We're not the oldest, we're one of the oldest countries in the world in terms of the proportion of our population that's elderly. But there's about 6 countries that have more people over 90 than we have. And that's basically the Scandinavian countries and Japan. And that's probably because, certainly in Japan, it's mostly rice and vegetables. So if you want to live to be a healthy 95-year-old, that's the menu you should go for. In the UK at the moment, we've got over 15 million people aged 60 or over. Over 15 million people. Nearly 12 million people aged 65 or older. A heck of a lot of pensioners. And we're expecting that by the time I'm touching 100, about a quarter of the population in this country will be pensioners. And that's why we've had to raise the pension age for women. It's been very hard on a group of women. Macron in France is trying to get the pension age up from 60. And the country has gone berserk. And he has to do it. Sooner or later they have to do it, because otherwise you've got a smaller and smaller proportion of younger people paying the tax for the pensions for a larger and larger group of older people. Because our state pension, we just get the right to have a state pension, but it comes out of current taxation. And I have to hope that Macron actually wins this, because otherwise the effect on France will be very, very hard. Let me tell you a story about the Queen and 100 birthday cards. And this is a true story. So when the Queen first became Her Majesty back in 1952, she used to send about 300 birthday cards to people aged 100 every year. Towards the end of her reign, it was up to 10,000 a year, and she had to increase the number of staff in the office to about 15, I think. And one of the rules that changed was this, that you'll get one when you're 100, from now the King. You will not get one at 101, 102, 103, or 104, which, if you think about it, saves them a lot of money. You'll get one at 105, and then you get them annually from there onwards until you pop your top. The palace had a letter from a lady pointing out, it was a little while ago, that she had 5 of these cards, and that she had got, and it had the same picture of the Queen in a yellow dress on each one. And she wrote a letter saying, when I get my next one at 109, could I please have a different card? And on her birthday, the knock on the door, and there's a card, and it's the Queen in a blue dress, and the postman was Prince William. Which tells you that they do have a sense of humour, they do know what you're doing. I actually had Britain's eldest person as a constituent for a while. Her name was Daisy Adams. And she had been widowed on the Somme, July the 1st, 1916, left as a widow of 34 years of age with 4 children when her husband was killed. Unfortunately, she didn't starve and she wasn't in too much penury because her husband had been a builder, and he was one of those that built the lots of that terraced housing that you get in the old mining constituencies. And he built this particular little row of 5 houses with their house on the end where she lived with the kids, and then she could have the rent from the other houses. And actually somebody once took me to one side and said, yes, and during the general strike when people didn't have any money, she was still insisting on her rent. So there's always more than one side to a story. But I got to know her when her son, Bert, who was 89, wrote me a letter of congratulations after one of the election results. And his letter, I've still got it somewhere, his letter said, me and my mother, bracket 107, close bracket, went to vote for you. What? So I looked this up, I thought, well, I'd love to meet this lady. And she was still living in this little terraced house. And as I got there, and I asked if I could use the facilities at one point, and she said, oh, it's out the back. Memories of my grandparents' house, it's out the back. So I used the facilities, and I come back and I said, Daisy, we can get you an indoor toilet. Oh, no, she says. I like it, she says. It's going during the night that keeps me going. At that stage, she had 4 children alive, and they range in age from Bert, who was 89, to the youngest, Joan, who was 75. As we went to, and from there onwards, I was a guest at every one of the birthday parties. And as we came out of one of the birthday parties, Bert got into his car and just drove off without a signal or anything, straight into the traffic, nearly caused an accident. And I'm standing next to his daughter, and I said, oh, did you see what your dad just did? And she said, yes, Mrs. Currie, thank you very much. We've been wanting to take the keys off him for years, and now we have the necessity to do so. We have the excuse to do so. He never took a test. The people who were driving when driving tests already came in did not have to take any tests. So he wouldn't know the highway code if it stood up and hit him. So we're going to take the keys off him. I then got another letter from him saying, not going to vote for you again. A few weeks after that, he had no road sense whatsoever. But a few weeks after that, I heard from somebody in Burton Hospital that he'd been trying to cross the road and he got knocked down by a car, but not badly. And that as he was being wheeled on the trolley into the X-ray department at Burton Hospital, he got hold of one of the nurses and he said, now you won't forget to tell my mother where I am, will you? She lived to 113. And I used to pop in there from time to time, and all she ever wanted was a natter and a bottle of House of Commons sherry. So, absolutely true story. I'll tell you another one about going back even further. Before I became an MP, I was a city councillor in the city of Birmingham. And I was very interested in housing. I became housing chairman at one stage. And in Birmingham built lots and lots and lots of tower blocks. We had something like 429 tower blocks with over 60,000 flats in. Birmingham is the kind of place, if they do something, they do a lot of it. So it's no accident they ended up with Spaghetti Junction, because they got dead keen on motorways, and so they ended up with lots of them. They got dead keen on tower blocks, they ended up with lots of them. When I came to South Derbyshire, there was one tower block in Derby, and I asked what happened. They said, well, we built it and we didn't like it, so we didn't build anymore. And I thought, gosh, what common sense. Fantastic. But in my advice bureau one day, there's a little old lady in a beautiful hat, big hat. Turned out she'd been a milliner when she was much younger. And we'll call her Mrs. Braithwaite. And there's Mrs. Braithwaite, and she's a little old lady, and she said, I wonder if you could get me moved. She said, I'm here, and I want to move into that tower block, and there's a couple of empty flats on floors 5 and 6 or whatever. Now, normally people want to move out of the tower block, so somebody moving in, that's fairly easy to do. She said, don't really know, my daughter's there in another flat, and it'd be nice if I come in nearby. Yeah, so we would do. And I met her a couple of times while we were waiting for the transfer and so on. And eventually it was a success, and she turned up with her daughter with a little bouquet of flowers. It's very nice, thank you. And I said, well, tell me a bit more about this. I mean, what got you really going that you really wanted to move? And she said, well, you know, you need to understand, you see, when the men get older, they sometimes lose interest. What? And she said, well, you've been on radio quite a lot, even those days, and you've been talking about how we should make the most of what years we've got and how we should enjoy ourselves, and, you know, the sort of thing that I've always done all my life. And I'd written a piece in the local paper, in the Birmingham Mail. And she took it out of her handbag and she said, there you are, that's what you've said, we should make the most of our older years. And I said, yes, and? She said, well, I was reading this in the paper. And then I looked at him, and he's stuck there in front of the telly, and he's not taking any notice of me, and I thought, that's it. I'm going to enjoy the rest of my life, and I'm not going to spend them with you. What? And that's the reason you came to see me, to get the flat? Yes. I said, oh my God. But what about him? Oh, don't worry about him, Mrs. Currie, she said. I don't think he's even noticed yet that I've gone. That's, you know, again, another true story. I've been very, very lucky in all the people that I've met over all those years. How have I done this? How have I been growing old disgracefully? Well, the first stage is don't give in. Don't give in. When you feel like just sitting in front of the telly, don't get up and walk and go about and all that kind of stuff. It works in slightly odd ways for somebody like myself. So the phone went 1 year, not that long ago. And Wendy, my agent from London, said, and it was about the end of October, and she said to me, Edwina, how are you feeling? I said, I'm feeling fine, thanks, Wendy. How can I help? And she said, well, have you got an up-to-date passport? Yes, I have. Have you got or have you ever had a visa for Australia? And as it happens, the answer is yes, because one of the ladies who's here has heard me speak on cruise ships. And if you are on a cruise ship that goes around Australia, you have to have a work visa. Even if you don't actually get off onto the land, the fact that the ship is in port and you are a member of crew, you have to have a work visa. Oh, good, she said. Can you go for a medical in Manchester on Tuesday? And I said, well, I could, but why? She said, because you're flying to Brisbane on Friday. And that was for I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, the jungle. And I think what had happened was that somebody who was supposed to be going had dropped out for one of those reasons. Like, you can't get a visa to Australia if you've got a cannabis conviction, that kind of thing, you know. And you'd be amazed at the number of people who think you can get a passport in 2 days flat. Even then you couldn't. So I had the wit to say, quite proud of myself, right, if I'm going, business class. I'm not sitting with my knees under my nose for 30 hours. I need to arrive in really reasonably good shape. And it worked out quite well. I rather enjoyed I'm tempted to say I thoroughly enjoyed myself, but I'm not sure that was quite true. It's quite hard work. You've got cameras everywhere. Everywhere. You bend down and there's a camera there and there's microphones. There's no privacy whatsoever. But actually, the older people who were in there coped much better because we were quite used to being without our phones. You know, when Matt Hancock said that he was keeping in touch with what was going on at home, anybody who'd been in it was saying, no, you aren't. No, you're not. They will tell you if something terrible happens at home. When Craig Charles's brother died, for example, they told him that and he left and he went home. But other than that, you have no idea. And I think the older people settled into a world without electronics, without coffee, quite, where the main thing you could do to pass the time was have a conversation. And we were okay with that. I discovered that one of the other people in there were only 2 of us in there with university degrees, and the other guy was Tinchy Strider, who I'd never heard of before, but who's a rapper. And so I said to him, fine, can you tell me something about the history of rap music? And he did. So we'd sit there for hours with him doing little drumstick things on trees, and we got as far as Dizzy Rascal before he got voted out. So don't ask me about anything after Dizzy Rascal. But it was an extraordinary experience, and to have ended up in the last 4 was really, I'm very grateful. That was really quite a compliment. And it was, I'd gone in with a couple of ideas. I'll stop in a minute and just tell you one more story. But I'd gone in with a couple of ideas. How is this programme going to work? And the chef in our house was my husband, my now late husband. He passed away 2.5 years ago. But he liked cooking, so I left him to it. Fine, if you want to cook. So I had in mind that if I was presented with something, when the basket comes down, that really looked a bit of a mess, that I'd probably say something like, that looks like my husband's cooking. And if I was going to do a trial with strange, I was going to say, that looks like my husband. And I didn't tell him in advance. But as it happened, neither of those took place. The food was fine. There's nothing like hunger for being a good sauce. And I never had to do one of those weirdo trials. I think it's just the way it panned out. I was just very, very lucky. So I enjoyed doing that, made some good friends there I'm still in touch with. It was much easier than doing Strictly Come Dancing. Because the thing about something like Strictly, I was 64 when I did Strictly Come Dancing. It's a physically very, very demanding thing to do. You are training 6, 8, 9 hours every day. And I'm not a physical person. I'm the one that used to get off PE by sitting quietly at the back, being nose in book. The best bit of it was being paired with Vincent Simone, who was lovely. The slight problem was that I was a bit taller than him. But he was such a nice guy. We kept in touch, and he invited me and John, my husband, to his wedding in Ireland the following year, which was really lovely. The hardest bit was when you have trained all day and you've been in high heels, you cannot walk. You really can't. My admiration for the people who get into the final rounds knows no bounds, because they dance beautifully and they're still upright and they look lovely and they actually manage to look as if they're enjoying it. Vincent and I were voted out the first time and he was in tears. And inside me I'm going, oh, thank God for that. So that was tough. But other than that, I keep getting asked to do all sorts of things, and I'm very lucky that I still have to fill in a tax return, I reckon. And I'm happy. I'll do that until the point will come when the phone will go, Edwina, will you do this, will you do that? And I shall eventually say, no, not anymore. But I haven't got to that stage yet. But I think overall I'm very lucky. I'm lucky to live in this wonderful country of ours, for all that we're a bit battered and bruised after COVID and a few other things. I'm very lucky to live in this beautiful part of the world in Whaley Bridge. And ladies, I'm very lucky to be able tonight to share these thoughts with you. Thank you. Okay, so let's open this up to questions and see what you all want to know. And you can comment. Bear this in mind. It's non-party political. I know what you did to Tony Blair. Yes, ma'am.
Do you still cycle, Edwina?
Do I still cycle? Sadly not, no. I did lots of long-distance cycle rides, including, St. Petersburg to Russia, to Moscow. We did Vilnius to Warsaw. That was for Marie Curie. Marie Curie was Polish, not French. Marie Szlewojska. She was born and brought up in Warsaw. The reason she went to Paris was women were not allowed to study at university in Poland. So she had to go to Paris, and that's where she met Pierre Curie and got famous and discovered radium. And so when we organised a bike ride for Marie Curie Cancer Care, I said, let's do it in Poland, because it's flat, which it isn't, but when you're recruiting, you have to sort of pretend a little bit. We did it twice. We did Krakow to Warsaw and raised, I think, £250,000, about 70 of us. And then we did a big one, which had 5 different start points, all riding into Warsaw, racing each other. From Berlin, Gdansk, Vilnius, that was the one I was on, Prague, over the mountains for the macho guys who like steep slopes, and again from Krakow. And we raised £125,000 in that one. It was great, absolutely great. But when we moved to Whaley Bridge, I don't know if you've noticed Whaley Bridge at all, but I'm on Whaley Lane, which is like 20% hill. And I could probably then have got up it, but going down it's a very, very dangerous exercise. And so I thought, no, time to stop. So now I walk dogs. That's what I do. Yes, ma'am.
Have you managed to keep up with your dancing since you did Strictly?
Do I manage to keep up with?
Dancing.
Did I manage to keep up with dancing? We did do the dancing. I did Strictly 2011. And one of the reasons I did it was I'd had a fall in Liverpool city centre. I'm Scouse originally, and I was in Liverpool city centre on a wet Saturday evening, a little early, about 5 o'clock. We went to the theatre, and I started down the steps to go towards the shopping centre and fell and broke my ankle. I ended up in hospital that night, and lots of pins and titanium screws and all the rest of it in the ankle. And 6 months later they said, would you like to do Strictly Come Dancing? And I thought, do you know what, that's a good way of getting fit, isn't it? I bet they've got physiotherapists. So it's one of the reasons why I said yes. But partly in preparation and partly afterwards, hubby and I did dance with Michael and Jackie Huff, who've got, they hold classes all over the High Peak area. We got quite good, like a tango. It's good for your hips, all that stuff, yeah. But he then got poorly again with cancer, and there comes a point where, and you'll all be aware of this, if your partner can't do something, it's not a great idea if you go and do it. So we did other things instead. We walked the dogs until he couldn't do that anymore either. So there we go. But if you do dance, keep at it. It's great. It's a wonderful way of making everything supple. Right, who's next? Yes, ma'am.
Is there any of the members of your family
Are any other members of my family in politics? Actually, no, because I think they probably had enough of it when they were kids, you know, and I'm sad about that. Going back, no, but that wasn't for want of trying. My dad, my grandparents, all my grandparents were immigrants. They all arrived in the 1890s from Poland, Belarus, Lithuania, and they were fleeing pogroms and poverty both at the same time. My grandfather, Joseph Crystal, arrived age 16, and we have no idea how he arrived. They probably all arrived in Liverpool thinking they were going to America and didn't have enough money to go any further. That was fairly common. But my dad was very interested in politics. And I think if the world had been slightly different, he would have wanted to be an MP. But even then, even in 1945 or thereabouts, when the Labour government was elected, it was much harder for somebody who didn't have much of a background or family money or active in a trade union or something like that to get selected. And it never happened, but I think he was always quite wistful about the idea. He never knew that I became an MP. He passed away, he knew I was a councillor in Birmingham, but he passed away the year that I got elected there. My mum, I think, always felt that I ought to get a proper job. I found a lovely old photo of Mum the other day, where I think maybe it began to dawn on her. Maybe I was doing something significant, shall we say, because it was a Mother's Day event in London at which there were the mothers of various well-known people. So Maureen Lipman's mother was there. I mean, she and my mum hit it off like, you know, they'd always known each other. The mothers of famous sports people were there. And there's my mum, who was by far the littlest, with a picture of me looking proud as punch in the lineup with everybody else. So I think she got the message in the end. Right, who's next?
I was going to ask you if, when you got the phone call from your manager in London to say, have you got a passport and have you got a work permit, had you got any clue you were going to be sent to Australia, or had you volunteered previously to be on the programme and it just happened?
Normally, these programmes, the question was, had I any inkling that I was going to be going to the jungle, when the first question was, have you got a passport, and so on. Normally, the jungle is broadcast from end November through to the beginning of December, about 3 weeks. And normally they choose people and do the contracts and so on about July. And Strictly is much the same. And so if you don't get the call in July, you're probably not going to go. That said, there will be dropouts and there will be changes. All my life, well, all my recent life, I've found that if I ask, I find out that actually they wanted Anne Widdecombe, but they couldn't get her. And I'm older than Anne Widdecombe, so I take that as a compliment. Usually something like that. I mean, for example, I don't think Matt Hancock knew he was going into the jungle until about 2 weeks before. I think he's been approached, and he's thought about it, and he's talked to Gina about it, and she said, "This is a wonderful opportunity for you to show what a lovely man you are." I was on radio night after night talking about that. I mean, he helped pay for a very good Christmas. What a div, honestly. I tell you something, I probably shouldn't say this, but virtually everyone that goes into a programme like that, not Strictly so much, but something like I'm a Celebrity, they're going in with an ego bigger than common sense. Do you know what I mean? Because they think they're going to be shown how wonderful they are. And it doesn't work like that. You have no control in there of what the editor puts out on you. I decided that the obvious thing to do was not care very much, just to enjoy it, make the most of it. Not care what my hair looked like, not care what I look like. There's no makeup of any kind. So there's nothing you can do about it. You get basic shampoo, ecological shampoo and all that sort of thing. But other than that, all you can do is kind of comb your hair and keep smiling. So you can't be vain. You really can't. And I'll tell you also why it finishes at the beginning of December. The whole programme, the whole idea is owned by ITV. And they make a lot of money out of it, which is fine. Because after we finished, beginning of December, the Germans come in and they do a whole German I'm a Celebrity on the same site, in the same location. And that takes 3 weeks and takes them up to Christmas. So that's how that works. So between them, they are helping to keep ITV going, and I think that's fine. It's good by me. Yes?
Yeah. Obviously you've done Celebrity, the dancing, Mastermind, did you say? Is there anything else that you'd really like to do on telly?
Anything else I'd like to do now? I've been approached to do all sorts of things like MasterChef, but
Oh yeah.
I don't, number one, I don't really like cooking. I mean, going back to when I was a teenager, an early teenager, there was a very strong division of ways. And I knew that I didn't want to be like my mum. I knew I wanted to be like my dad and my brother and have a career. I don't know where that came from, but that meant I never learned to type, I never learned to cook.
So and B?
I learned to make clothes because my dad was a tailor, but that was slightly different. And I never wanted to run a house or anything like that. In fact, the best moment of my day, of my life in many ways, I have asthma, you probably hear I'm a little bit husky. And when eventually asthma was properly diagnosed, the GP said to me, you have a skin test on your arms and see what comes up, what reacts to the various irritants. And the GP said to me, I'm not sure how you're going to take this, Edwina. He said, but you are excused housework. He said you are allergic to house dust, house mites, and feathers. Now, these days I'd have gone, yay! But I said, oh, right, okay. Went home, told my husband, got a cleaning lady. Bless. If we hadn't, my house would be probably a bit like my daughter's. So I've turned down programmes like MasterChef and so on. Also, to be honest, they're always about cakes. And if I started making them, I'd start eating them, and then I'd look a bit different. So try and keep off stuff like that. There you go. But I do admire Mary Berry, goodness me. There was another one somewhere. Yes?
At what point did you decide you wanted to go into politics?
At what point did I decide I wanted to go into politics? I was always interested in the way things work. By things, I mean society as a whole. I went to the Liverpool Institute High School for Girls. The Beatles, two of them, Paul and George, went to Liverpool Institute High School for boys. And the only way you could get in there was if you did A-level maths or you joined the student Christian movement. Now, I was brought up in an Orthodox Jewish household, so I didn't tell my mum I'd joined the student Christian movement. But one thing that I was able to do was to get an agreement from school that I could go down into town and join my dad for lunch. Okay? There would be occasions when the school thought I was with my dad thought I was at school and I was with Cavan. But Dad's way of talking to his 14-year-old daughter was to get the News Chronicle or whatever, the Manchester Guardian, whatever he was reading at the time, and point to a headline and say, look at this, look what they're up to now, and talk about it. And we would talk. I remember when Macmillan came, the Prime Minister came to Liverpool in 1963, when I would be about 14, 15, urging us to join the Common Market. He spoke in the Philharmonic Hall in Liverpool. And the sense of sadness afterwards when de Gaulle said no, and what all that was about. So I arrived at university to do chemistry, just like Margaret Thatcher, because it was easier for girls to get in to do science. And then I realised I was much more interested in politics, and I was able to switch. And at that point, you then start to think, what am I going to do with this? How am I going to earn a living? And I thought I'd be a researcher or something like that. I remember sitting next to Quinton Hogg at a dinner, giving him a bit of a poke. And he said, what are you doing? And I said, well, I've never sat next to an MP before. I just want to see if you're real. And that gave me the opportunity and the means, if you like, to start thinking seriously, what are you going to do with this? Now, the Liverpool I'd grown up in had a woman MP, had Bessie Braddock, all over the front pages of the Liverpool Echo the whole time. So there was never any question in my mind that a woman could do this. Of course she could. Marie Curie was a great heroine of mine, and so was Lady Astor. So you think, well, all right, if they can do it, I wonder how it's done. What was missing from that narrative was any feeling that I couldn't because I was a woman, or that women were victims, or that women were being kept down. I was just, how do people get into Parliament? And the answer is 8 years in local government, get to know everybody, learn to speak, become a bit of an expert on something, get to know the MPs of your area, and keep an eye open for where there'll be vacancies. And I had actually checked some odd careers, one of whom was Enoch Powell. Not a fan of his, but still he was a very odd man. He had gone to 50 constituencies before he was accepted. Bessie Braddock, who died last week, fought 5 seats in 5 different locations before she got in. Persistence. So I just kept going. After I get into the final 3 or something, and then what I would do is I would contact the chairman or the agent, whoever's there. So what can I do? What can I do next? How can I learn from this? And the chairman of Stratford-on-Avon wrote a letter back saying, well, we just decided we weren't going to have a woman. I've still got that letter somewhere. I should frame it and put it in the downstairs loo, shouldn't I? And somewhere else the agent said to me, it wasn't a problem with you, she said, and your answers were all fine. It was a problem with your husband. It was the first husband. I know he's heard you several times before, but he was looking out the window and he was looking at the ceiling and he was looking at his fingernails, and he did actually look at his watch at one point. And what you have to say to him is, however bored you are, you've got to look at my left ear roll and keep your eyes there. So when he came home, he said, what did she say? And I said, sit down, I'll tell you. And I did. He didn't say a word. He went out to the pub. But the next one, there's a photograph of him looking at my left ear roll. And another one was, the answer was, you were too pretty. What? You were too pretty. You want to be an MP, dress like an MP. What do you mean? Wear a black suit. I haven't got a black suit. That's the point. Go and get a black suit. So I went into wherever it was, Rackham's in Birmingham, and I found a very nice black velvet suit that had filigree on it, so it wasn't too stark. And I wore that, and that was South Derbyshire, and I got it. She was dead right. Politics is full of trivial moments that actually mean something. If you then, 1983, if you wanted to overcome prejudice about women being kind of feeble, then you had to look like a man. But not so much like a man that they thought you were probably gay. So you had to do it in a fairly subtle way. That's what Margaret Thatcher did. And she wore the dark suits with the white revers. And she dropped her voice and talked like that. But if you do it, and you get into the place, then you can have a whole debate on women's health. It's getting over that barrier that is the difficult bit. Not so much now, but it certainly was then. When I arrived in the House, we had 23 women MPs out of 656. And we all looked at each other and we said, yeah, but we've got the Prime Minister. So, does that answer your question? Yes, ma'am.
Consider any of the other parties?
Did I consider any of the other parties? This is the WI, and you'll lynch me if I talk party politics. I know you will. People get involved in one party or another. Sometimes it depends who's in power and whether they are naturally supportive of that regime or whether they are naturally a little bit more, I was going to say not reactionary, I mean if they are more radical. Actually, Margaret Thatcher was as radical as you get if you think about her career. But the Liverpool I grew up in was riven by strikes and a sense of despair. It was losing population as fast as Belfast was, but not for reasons of the violence, just for reasons of it didn't seem to have a future. And I've always been a natural optimist. I think people should be encouraged and given their best opportunities and urged to be ambitious. And I hate it when people do themselves down. And that would push me into being more on one side than on the other. But that's just me, and people have different views. Shall we say other flavours are available? Does that answer your question? Okay.
You considered other routes, so they might have made it easier.
Other routes, you want to get into Parliament, you've got to get elected. You want to get elected, you have to be in a seat where you've got a chance of being elected. You want to be in a seat where you've got a chance of being elected, you've got to get selected. That's the hard bit. That's the hard bit. And it helps if you're known. It helps if you have some experience. It helps if you can answer the questions. At that time, there was a great deal of debate, as indeed there is still in the United States, on issues like abortion and at what age this should be allowed and so on. There was a heated debate going on. And one of the questions in the selection committee, the final selection committee, was what my attitude was. And I was able to say, well, I've chaired social services in Birmingham with 4,000 children in care. And I've had to take a decision in loco parentis for a 12-year-old girl who was in our care who was pregnant by her father. And I felt that she was too young as a child to be forced through a pregnancy. So I've had to take that decision. And that means that I feel that law does need to be there in order to help those who need it. And that helps you to win their trust. Yeah? I mean, it's true. We've all gone quiet now. Yes, ma'am. There's one there, and then there's one there. What would I have done if I hadn't done politics? Given absolute choice, I'd have loved to have been the boss of a big business. One of the people I was at uni with had the same surname as me. His name is Ronald Cohen. And he went on to be the boss of big business. He runs a £2 billion Apex hedge fund now. He's now Sir Ronnie Cohen. He's a supporter of the Labour Party. You know, just how things work out. I think I would have enjoyed bossing people around, which you can't do in politics. Politics is the art of persuading people to do something. Very often persuading them that they thought of it first. And then they'll do all the work on it. Whereas, I suppose that's true in business as well.
It's true in
But
marriage as well.
it's true in all sorts of things. It's true in all sorts of things. But that would have been not a possibility for somebody from my very ordinary background without any capital. I was a teacher for some years to fit in with the kids. I've often wondered, I used to teach at Kingston College of Further Education, which became eventually part of Kingston University in Surrey. And if I'd stayed there long enough, I'd have been vice principal on a salary of about £400,000 a year, doing, I suspect, very little. But I wouldn't have been satisfied with that. No, I'm very lucky I've been able to do all sorts of things. The young lad, a 14-year-old Ukrainian, I've got a 9-year-old and a 14-year-old and their mum. And I take him to school, well, I take him to the school bus. And I'm trying to drum some of my ideas into him, being really subversive. And I said to him, look, the key thing in life is to figure out what you really like doing and get somebody to pay you to do it. And if that happens all your life, you'll be very happy. And that's what's happened to me. There's somebody here. Yes, ma'am.
What question do you get asked the most?
What question do I get asked the most? Some of them are rude. It depends if there's men in the room. When I'm out and about, especially say if I've gone to the theatre or something like that, there will often be somebody who comes up to me and says, "You are who I think you are, aren't you?" Which can be difficult to answer. Sometimes it'll be a gentleman who says, "You don't remember me, do you?" To which the correct answer is no. But the way I often put it is, if he's a sort of nice-looking silver fox type, I might just say, "Oh, it's been a long time." So you get that sort of thing. I got stopped by a little gaggle of kids in Manchester city centre not long ago, and they and then they grab you and they shove the phone in your face, and then they take pictures and they're off they go. And I heard one of them say to the other, "Well, I know she's famous, but who is she?" Any more? How are we doing for time?
Yeah, I just want to ask one question.
You want?
You obviously are very confident, very, I wouldn't say easily intimidated, but is there anything at all that phases you?
Is there anything that phases me? When I was in the jungle, you know, we get cockroaches and smelly stuff and liver and all that kind of thing thrown at you. And it's a mental game. You zoom out, you concentrate on what you're supposed to be doing and make sure it doesn't distract you in any way. But towards the end, and I'm honestly, if you ever go into something like that and they interview you beforehand, you tell them you're scared of everything, all right? Don't let on about what you're really scared about. That's the way to do it. But I wasn't bothered about rats and iguanas and stuff like that. And at the end, one of the women producers said to me, "Aren't you scared of anything?" And the answer was, people. People. It was very scary being in Parliament in the 1980s, with the IRA putting bombs under our cars. And you had to be both alert and check your car and that sort of thing, and not let it stop you. We were all given a briefing by special branch. However tempted you are to have a specialised number plate, don't. It will identify your car. And I still have that feeling. Sometimes you look at something that's happening that is very scary, and you have to be resolute. Looking at what Putin is up to in Russia, in Ukraine, and seeing the courage and determination of the Ukrainians, I know who's going to win that. I'm absolutely sure the Ukrainians are going to win it. I asked my Ukrainians if they're planning a trip home at all, because it's over a year since they've left. And they phoned home and talked about it, and then they said to me, not yet. Not yet. The advice from home is not yet, but we will go sometime, hopefully this year. And I look forward to going myself to that. But no, I think if you face everything, think about it, evaluate it, either sidestep it, refuse to do it, jump round it, have something else to do on the day. It'll be fine. Okay, are we sorted? Any more? Any more? Oh, one more. Yes, go ahead, ma'am.
You talk about growing old disgracefully. Has there ever been an occasion when age has been a benefit to you?
Ever been an occasion when age has been a benefit to me? It is on Twitter. And the way, because there are several reasons. Anybody here do Twitter? It's not a shameful thing to do, you know. The thing about Twitter is that you have to produce something in 140, it's slightly more than that now, but you've got to produce a pithy phrase. Now, being a Scouser, I had to grow up learning how to respond very quickly. So, for example, you get a phrase like, fools rush in where angels fear to tread. Well, the correct answer to that is, angels rush in where fools fear to tread. And that was the sort of thing we learned how to do when we were, kids. I was be lippy all the time. And what an older person can do is draw on all sorts of little references and comments. You've got a well-stocked head because you've been around for a long time, yeah? And you've probably been better educated than a lot of today's kids. So you have the opportunity to draw on that. And then when somebody says you're being patronising, you say, well, I'm 76, of course I'm patronising. And there is no answer to that. There's no answer to that. So you can have a lot of fun on something like that. Also, you know that if it starts getting a bit unpleasant, you can mock the people who are being rude about you, you can block them, and you can just do something else for 3 weeks. And I think the youngsters feel that they won't even exist if they're not doing Instagram and Facebook and all the rest of it, and we know that we are. We're fine. We'll come back to it. Go and read a good book, and by the time I've come back, they're being rude about, I don't know, Gary Lineker or something. Yeah, so that's an advantage, big advantage. Okay. Are we done? Yes. We are. Thank you all very much indeed.